Ayahuasca, the vine that eats souls and spits out truth. For 7,000 years, shamans guarded the secret. 2 plants, 80,000 species in the Amazon. Only these 2, brewed together, tear open the fabric of consciousness itself. The science is impossible. DMT should be destroyed before it reaches the brain, dead on arrival. But indigenous peoples discovered what laboratories never could. The vine disables your body's defenses. The leaf floods your brain with visions no human should witness. Serpents made of light. Jaguars with eyes that see through time. Dead relatives speaking truths you buried. Your darkest shame replaying in crystalline detail. The universe revealing itself as alive, conscious, watching, and the purging. Vomiting your trauma onto jungle floors. Your body expelling decades of poison in one brutal night. Now Silicon Valley wants enlightenment in a cup. Retreat centers harvest the rainforest. Instagram influencers commodify the sacred. And indigenous shamans watch Westerners pay thousands for what colonizers once tried to destroy. The plants taught the recipe through dreams. Western science cannot explain it. But 10 million people have drunk, and none return unchanged. One night, one cup. Reality never closes back up. The vine does not forgive. This is the complete science of ayahuasca. Before we begin, if you enjoy these types of interesting science topics, hit the like button, comment, and tell us where you are listening from. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, you know what to do. Simply subscribe. Deep in the Amazon rainforest, where thousands of plant species compete for light beneath the canopy, indigenous peoples discovered something extraordinary. Among the countless vines, leaves, roots, and barks that could be combined in infinite permutations, they found 2 plants that, when brewed together, opened doorways to dimensions of consciousness that defied explanation. This discovery predates written history, preserved instead through oral tradition, ceremony, and the direct experience of countless generations. The first plant is a vine, thick as a human arm, spiraling up rainforest trees in twisted woody coils. Banisteriopsis capi grows throughout the Amazon basin, recognizable by its smooth bark and small pink flowers. Indigenous peoples call it by many names: ayahuasca, capi, yage, natima, depending on the language and region. The word ayahuasca itself, from Quechua, translates roughly as vine of the soul or vine of the dead, hinting at the profound states it facilitates. The second plant is a shrub from the coffee family, Psychotria viridis, known commonly as chacruna. Its leaves contain the visionary component, though consuming them alone produces no effects. Only when combined with the vine does the magic emerge. A fact that raises profound questions about how indigenous peoples discovered this combination among the Amazon's estimated 80,000 plant species. Western scientists, encountering this botanical puzzle, struggled to explain the discovery. The standard narrative suggests trial and error over thousands of years, but indigenous knowledge holders offer a different explanation. The plants taught them. Through dreams, visions, and what they describe as direct communication with plant spirits, shamans learned which combinations to use, how to prepare them, and how to work with the resulting states of consciousness. Archaeological evidence of ayahuasca use remains limited because organic materials decompose rapidly in tropical environments. But indirect evidence, including ceremonial objects and iconography depicting serpents and jaguars, common ayahuasca visions, suggests use extending back at least 1,000 years, and likely much longer. Oral histories within indigenous communities describe ayahuasca as older than memory, woven into the foundation of their cultures. The ceremony surrounding ayahuasca use is as important as the brew itself. Traditional contexts involve a shaman or curandero, a healer who has spent years, often decades, in apprenticeship learning to work with plant medicines. These practitioners undergo rigorous dietas, periods of isolation with restricted diets and sexual abstinence, during which they develop relationships with plant spirits and learn healing songs called ikaros. Ceremonies typically occur at night, in darkness or dim candlelight. Participants sit in a circle, often in a maloka, a traditional communal house. The shaman administers small cups of the brew, then leads the ceremony through ikaros, songs believed to guide the experience, protect participants, and facilitate healing. The ceremony is not recreational, but medicinal and spiritual, addressing illness, providing guidance, connecting participants with ancestors and spirit realms. Different indigenous groups develop distinct ayahuasca traditions. The Shipibo Conibo of Peru are renowned for their intricate geometric patterns, called kene, which appear in their artwork and which participants often see during ceremonies. The Shuar of Ecuador use ayahuasca, which they call nadam, to communicate with ancestors and gain power for hunting and warfare. The Kofan, Siona, and numerous other groups each have unique ceremonial practices, songs, and understandings of what ayahuasca reveals. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in South America in the 16th century, they encountered indigenous ayahuasca use and reacted with horror. Colonial authorities, viewing indigenous spiritual practices as devil worship, attempted to suppress ayahuasca ceremonies. Catholic missionaries prohibited use, destroyed ceremonial objects, and punished practitioners. Many indigenous communities were forced to practice in secret, preserving their traditions underground while outwardly adopting Christianity. Despite centuries of suppression, ayahuasca traditions survived. In remote areas where colonial control was weak, ceremonies continued openly. In regions under colonial domination, practitioners concealed their activities or syncretized their beliefs, blending indigenous and Catholic elements in ways that allowed continuation under a veneer of Christian orthodoxy. Western scientific interest in ayahuasca began in the mid-19th century. British botanist Richard Spruce, exploring the Amazon in the 1850s, encountered ayahuasca use among the Tucanoan peoples and collected samples of the vine. His specimens eventually reached European botanical institutions, where they were classified and studied. Though their psychoactive properties remained poorly understood, the chemical responsible for ayahuasca's visionary effects was isolated in the 1930s. Scientists extracted a compound from Banisteriopsis caapi and named it telepathine, reflecting reports that ayahuasca facilitated telepathic communication. Later research revealed this compound was identical to harmine, already known from other plants. But researchers initially missed the crucial component, the DMT, in the added leaves, not understanding that ayahuasca's power came from the combination of plants, not the vine alone. DMT, or N-dimethyltryptamine, was first synthesized in 1931 by Canadian chemist Richard Manska, but its psychedelic properties remained unknown for 2 decades. In the 1950s, Hungarian chemist and psychiatrist Stephen Zara, unable to obtain LSD for research, synthesized DMT and tested it on himself through injection. The experience was overwhelming, brief, and intensely visual, establishing DMT as one of the most powerful psychedelics known. The connection between DMT and ayahuasca was established through ethnobotanical research in the mid-20th century. Scientists analyzing ayahuasca brews discovered that while the vine contained harmala alkaloids with mild psychoactive properties, the profound visionary experiences came from DMT in the chacruna leaves. But DMT consumed orally is normally inactive, broken down in the digestive system by an enzyme called monoamine oxidase before reaching the brain. This is where the genius of ayahuasca becomes apparent. The harmala alkaloids in the vine are MAO inhibitors. They block monoamine oxidase, allowing DMT to survive digestion and reach the bloodstream intact. The vine enables the leaf's power, a sophisticated pharmacological interaction that indigenous peoples discovered through means Western science still struggles to explain. By the late 20th century, ayahuasca began attracting attention beyond academic circles. The counterculture of the 1960s and 70s, fascinated by consciousness exploration, learned about ayahuasca through anthropological reports and accounts from travelers who had participated in Amazonian ceremonies. Writers like William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg experimented with ayahuasca in the 1950s, documenting their experiences and introducing the brew to wider audiences. But ayahuasca remained obscure compared to LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, or mescaline. It required specific plants, careful preparation, and traditionally occurred within ceremonial contexts that couldn't easily be replicated. The experience itself was demanding, often involving hours of nausea, vomiting, and intense psychological confrontation, very different from the more recreational or aesthetic experiences associated with other psychedelics. The origin story of ayahuasca is fundamentally different from substances like heroin, methamphetamine, or even cannabis. It emerged not from laboratories or agricultural commodification, but from the deep relationship between indigenous peoples and the rainforest. It was never a medicine in the Western sense, not a pill prescribed for a specific ailment, but a tool for navigating the spiritual dimensions of existence, for healing illnesses understood as imbalances of soul and spirit. This origin in indigenous shamanic practice shapes everything about ayahuasca's modern journey. Questions of cultural appropriation, intellectual property, environmental sustainability, and spiritual authenticity all trace back to this foundation. The brew's spread beyond the Amazon involves a collision between ancient traditions and modern seeking, between reverence and commodification, between healing and tourism. The plants themselves remain rooted in the Amazon, and understanding ayahuasca requires understanding where and how these plants are gathered and prepared. Ayahuasca begins with the forest. The vine, Banisteriopsis caapi, grows wild throughout the Amazon basin, but also is cultivated in indigenous gardens, where plants are tended with the same care given to food crops. The vine can live for decades, growing thick and woody, climbing high into the canopy. Harvesting requires knowledge, not just of where the vine grows, but of when to harvest, how much to take, and how to do so without damaging the plant's ability to regenerate. Traditional practitioners describe a relationship with the vine that goes beyond botanical knowledge. They speak of asking permission before harvesting, of dreams that indicate when and where to gather plants, of respecting the vine as a teacher and ally, rather than merely a resource. This approach reflects indigenous cosmologies where plants, animals, and humans exist in reciprocal relationships, each with agency and intelligence. The harvesting process is straightforward, but labor-intensive. Sections of the vine are cut, often several meters long, and carried back from the forest. The outer bark is sometimes removed, and the vine is pounded or shredded to break down the woody material and facilitate extraction of the alkaloids. Chacruna leaves are gathered from shrubs, selected for their maturity and vitality. Both plants must be fresh or properly dried to maintain potency. Preparation of the brew is where ceremony begins. The process is not simply cooking, but a ritual act believed to influence the medicine's power and intention. The shaman or brewmaster conducts preparation with prayers, songs, and sometimes dietary restrictions, viewing themselves as intermediaries between the plants and the people who will receive the medicine. The basic method involves placing the pounded vine and chacruna leaves in a large pot with water and boiling for hours, often 6 to 12 hours or longer, sometimes over multiple days. As the water evaporates, more is added. The liquid is strained, the plant material returned to the pot with fresh water, and the process repeated multiple times. Eventually, the strained liquid is reduced to a concentrated brown or reddish-brown liquid, thick and bitter, the ayahuasca brew. The taste is notoriously unpleasant. Descriptions range from bitter to acrid to muddy, often inducing gagging or immediate nausea. This unpleasantness is not incidental, but part of the experience. The purging that follows, vomiting and diarrhea, is considered essential, understood as the medicine cleansing physical, emotional, and spiritual toxins. Regional variations in preparation are extensive. Some traditions add additional plants to the brew, each imparting different qualities or addressing specific healing needs. Brugmansia suaveolens, a potent deliriant, is sometimes added in small amounts to intensify visions, though it increases risk significantly. Tobacco, mapacho, is often added to strengthen the brew or used separately in ceremony as protection and purification. The Shipibo tradition emphasizes specific songs, icaros, sung during preparation to imbue the brew with healing intention. Each shaman has their own icaros, learned from their teacher or received directly from the plants during dieta. These songs are considered as important as the plants themselves, guiding the medicine's effects and protecting participants from harmful spirits or energies. In traditional contexts, not everyone has access to ayahuasca. It is not a recreational substance but a powerful medicine reserved for specific purposes: healing illness, divination, communicating with spirits, or undergoing initiation. Casual use is uncommon. Those who drink do so with intention and preparation, often fasting beforehand and following dietary restrictions that are believed to make the experience safer and more effective. The shaman's role extends beyond brewing and serving. They are navigators of the visionary space, using their experience and spirit allies to guide participants through challenging moments, to call in healing energies, and to protect the ceremonial space from malevolent forces. This role requires years of training, multiple dietas, and direct relationship with the plant spirits. In traditional communities, becoming a shaman is a calling, not a career choice, often marked by serious illness or near-death experience that opens the person to the spirit world. As ayahuasca gained international attention, demand increased beyond what traditional small-scale harvesting could supply. Commercial cultivation of both Banisteriopsis caapi and Psychotria viridis expanded in Peru, Brazil, and Colombia. Vine sections are sold in markets in cities like Iquitos and Pucallpa, and chacruna leaves can be purchased fresh or dried. This commercialization makes ayahuasca accessible, but raises sustainability concerns. Wild harvesting, when done at industrial scale to supply the growing ayahuasca tourism industry, can damage ecosystems. Vines take years to mature, and overharvesting depletes populations. Chacruna shrubs can be stripped of leaves faster than they regenerate. Some regions have seen local shortages as demand from retreat centers and urban ceremonies outpaces sustainable harvest rates. Additionally, quality and authenticity become concerns in commercial contexts. Not all commercially available ayahuasca is prepared with the care and intention traditional practitioners employ. Some producers prioritize efficiency and profit over ceremony and respect. The medicine's power, from an indigenous perspective, derives not just from chemistry but from the relationship, intention, and ritual surrounding its preparation. The rise of pharmahuasca, synthetic ayahuasca, made from extracted or synthesized DMT combined with pharmaceutical MAO inhibitors, represents another development. This approach removes ayahuasca from its plant and cultural origins entirely, reducing it to a combination of molecules that can be calibrated for dose and effect. Advocates argue this provides safer, more consistent experiences. Critics contend it strips away the cultural context and plant intelligence that make ayahuasca transformative. The journey from forest to cup involves not just botany and chemistry, but also belief systems, cultural practices, and ethical considerations. As ayahuasca moves from indigenous contexts to global markets, questions arise about who has the right to use these plants, how to honor their origins, and whether commodification inevitably corrupts the medicine's integrity. Yet the plants themselves remain powerful regardless of context. The DMT and Harmala alkaloids function pharmacologically, whether prepared by a Shipibo shaman after days of dieta, or by a facilitator in a Brooklyn loft who learned the recipe online. But the experience, meaning, and consequences differ profoundly depending on the context in which ayahuasca is consumed. The transformation of plants into medicine involves chemistry, but understanding what ayahuasca does requires exploring the molecular mechanisms that make this ancient brew so uniquely powerful. Ayahuasca exists as a murky brown liquid, the consistency ranging from watery to syrupy, depending on reduction. The color varies from light tan to deep reddish brown, sometimes nearly black. It smells earthy, vegetal, and slightly acrid. The taste is intensely bitter and unpleasant, though some preparations are worse than others. This liquid contains a complex mixture of alkaloids, tannins, and other compounds extracted from the vine and leaves through prolonged boiling. The chemistry underlying ayahuasca's effects is elegant and counterintuitive. DMT, the primary visionary compound, is structurally similar to serotonin, a neurotransmitter that regulates mood, perception, and cognition. This similarity allows DMT to bind to serotonin receptors in the brain, particularly the 5-HT2A receptor, which is the same receptor activated by LSD and psilocybin. When DMT floods these receptors, normal patterns of neural activity are disrupted, producing the profound alterations in consciousness characteristic of psychedelic experiences. But there is a problem. DMT consumed orally is broken down almost immediately in the gut and liver by the enzyme monoamine oxidase, specifically MAOA. This enzyme exists precisely to prevent substances like DMT from reaching the brain in high concentrations. It is a protective mechanism, breaking down potentially problematic compounds from food and maintaining neurochemical stability. This is where Banisteriopsis caapi becomes essential. The vine contains beta-carboline alkaloids, primarily harmine, harmaline, and tetrahydroharmine, which are reversible MAOA inhibitors. When these compounds enter the digestive system, they temporarily disable monoamine oxidase, creating a window during which orally consumed DMT can survive digestion, enter the bloodstream, cross the blood-brain barrier, and reach serotonin receptors in concentrations sufficient to produce visionary effects. This pharmacological synergy is what makes ayahuasca work. Neither component alone produces the full effect. The vine without chacruna provides mild stimulation, subtle mood changes, and possibly enhanced dream activity, but not the intense visions and ego dissolution associated with ayahuasca. Chacruna without the vine provides nothing orally, the DMT destroyed before it can act. Together, they unlock each other's potential. The discovery of this combination by indigenous peoples, without laboratories or knowledge of monoamine oxidase, remains one of the most compelling mysteries of ethnobotany. The standard explanation, random trial and error, seems inadequate given the Amazon's plant diversity. Indigenous explanations that the plants themselves communicated the recipe through dreams and visions cannot be proven by Western science but resonate with practitioners who report similar communications during ayahuasca experiences. The harmala alkaloids have their own effects beyond enabling DMT absorption. They produce mild euphoria, sedation, and visual enhancement even without DMT. They increase dream vividness and recall. Some traditions use the vine alone, without chacruna, in ceremonies focused on different healing modalities than the visionary work facilitated by full ayahuasca. When ayahuasca is consumed, effects typically begin within 30 to 45 minutes, slower than smoked DMT, which acts within seconds, but faster than mushrooms or LSD, which take an hour or more. The onset is often signaled by nausea, a tightness in the stomach, and the urge to purge. This purging, while physically unpleasant, is considered central to the healing process. From an indigenous perspective, illness is not merely physical, but involves spiritual and energetic imbalances. Ayahuasca reveals these imbalances and facilitates their release through purging. Vomiting, diarrhea, sweating, and crying are all understood as the medicine expelling what does not serve the person's well-being. The purge is the healing. Western participants often struggle with this aspect. Vomiting is uncomfortable and embarrassing, and Western medical understanding views it as a side effect rather than the therapeutic mechanism. But experienced practitioners emphasize surrender to the purge, allowing the medicine to do its work rather than resisting the process. The visionary phase of the experience begins as the initial discomfort subsides, or sometimes simultaneously with purging. With eyes closed, participants see intricate geometric patterns, often in vivid colors, morphing and flowing in impossible ways. These patterns sometimes resolve into representational visions: jungles, serpents, jaguars, spirit beings, deceased relatives, past traumas replaying with new perspective, future possibilities, or abstract concepts taking visual form. The nature of ayahuasca visions differs from other psychedelics. They often have a jungle or organic quality, vines and plants and animals, reflecting the medicine's origins. Many participants report encounters with entities or presences, sometimes identified as plant spirits or teachers, sometimes as aspects of their own psyche, sometimes as genuinely other. These entities may communicate through visions, feelings, or a kind of direct knowing that transcends language. The emotional component of ayahuasca can be intense. Participants confront suppressed traumas, grief, shame, and fear with an intensity that can be overwhelming. But they also experience profound love, connection, gratitude, and awe. The medicine is described as showing what needs to be seen, not always what one wants to see, but what is necessary for healing and growth. The physical experience continues throughout. Beyond the initial purge, there may be waves of nausea, temperature fluctuations, trembling, and profound exhaustion. Some participants report physical sensations of energy moving through the body, blockages releasing, or a kind of internal surgery occurring. The body becomes a site of processing and release. The duration of an ayahuasca experience is typically 4 to 6 hours, though it can extend longer with high doses or individual variation in metabolism. The peak occurs 1 to 2 hours after onset, with effects gradually diminishing over the remaining time. Unlike the abrupt offset of some drugs, ayahuasca fades slowly, leaving participants in a tender, open state. The aftermath is as important as the experience itself. In the hours and days following ceremony, participants often report feeling raw, vulnerable, and profoundly altered in perspective. Insights received during the experience must be integrated into daily life, a process that requires reflection, support, and often significant life changes. Without integration, the insights fade, and the experience becomes merely a strange memory rather than a catalyst for transformation. The chemistry of ayahuasca explains how it works, but not what it means. The molecular mechanisms, the receptor binding, the neurotransmitter changes, all of this describes the process, but not the content. What participants encounter in ayahuasca space, whether understood as projections of the unconscious mind or as genuine contact with other dimensions of reality, remains beyond the scope of chemistry to explain. As ayahuasca spread beyond its traditional contexts, the routes it traveled and the networks that formed around it reflected both genuine spiritual seeking and the inevitable commodification of anything that becomes popular in a globalized economy. Ayahuasca's expansion beyond the Amazon follows a pattern distinct from the trafficking routes of illegal drugs. There is no cartel violence, no smuggling in hidden compartments, no interdiction by law enforcement. Instead, ayahuasca spread through spiritual networks, word of mouth, transformative experiences shared among seekers, and the gradual establishment of retreat centers and churches that formalized access. The first major pathway out of traditional indigenous use came through mestizo shamanism in Peru and Brazil. In regions where indigenous and Western cultures mixed, hybrid forms of practice emerged. Mestizo shamans, often of mixed indigenous and European ancestry, learned from indigenous teachers but adapted practices for broader audiences. They served not only local communities but also the growing number of outsiders interested in plant medicines. Cities like Iquitos in Peru and Manaus in Brazil became hubs for ayahuasca tourism by the late 20th century. These cities, gateways to the Amazon, attracted travelers seeking authentic experiences with shamans. A tourism industry developed, with lodges and retreat centers offering multi-day programs that included multiple ayahuasca ceremonies, jungle treks, and cultural immersion. This tourism brought economic opportunities to impoverished regions, but also complications. Some facilitators prioritized profit over authenticity, offering diluted medicine or superficial ceremonies to maximize client throughput. Others maintained integrity, genuinely serving as bridges between indigenous wisdom and Western seekers. Distinguishing between authentic practitioners and opportunists became a challenge for visitors unfamiliar with the culture. Two Brazilian churches, Santo Daime and União do Vegetal, played major roles in ayahuasca's globalization. Both were founded in the 20th century, blending indigenous ayahuasca use with Christianity, African diaspora religions, and Spiritism. They formalized ayahuasca ceremonies into church rituals, complete with hymns, prayers, and structured formats that made the experience more accessible to urban Brazilians unfamiliar with jungle shamanism. Santo Daime, founded in the 1930s by Raimundo Irineu Serra, a Brazilian of African descent who worked in the rubber trade, presents ayahuasca, which they call dame or hoasca, as a sacrament. Ceremonies involve drinking the tea while singing hymns, often for many hours, in a structured communal setting. The church has specific doctrines, a hierarchy, and rituals that blend Catholicism with indigenous and African spiritual traditions. União do Vegetal, or UDV, founded in 1961 by José Gabriel da Costa, takes a more intellectual approach, emphasizing moral teachings and personal responsibility alongside the visionary experience. UDV ceremonies are more subdued than Santo Daime, involving drinking the tea and then sitting in meditation while receiving teachings from Mestre leaders. Both churches spread throughout Brazil and then internationally. By the 1990s, Santo Daime and UDV had established branches in the United States, Europe, Japan, and Australia. This raised immediate legal questions. Ayahuasca contains DMT, a Schedule I controlled substance in the United States and many other countries. Could religious use be protected under freedom of religion? Legal battles ensued. In the United States, the UDV fought for the right to import and use ayahuasca as a sacrament. The case reached the Supreme Court, which in 2006 ruled in favor of UDV, affirming that their religious use of ayahuasca was protected under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. This precedent created space for legal ayahuasca use within religious contexts, though it did not extend to secular or individual use. Santo Daime won similar protections in various countries, though legal status remains complex and varies by jurisdiction. In some places, ayahuasca churches operate openly with government approval. In others, they exist in gray zones, tolerated but not officially sanctioned. In still others, they face prohibition and persecution. Beyond the churches, informal ayahuasca circles proliferated in Western cities. Facilitators, some trained by indigenous shamans, some self-taught, some with questionable credentials, began offering ceremonies in homes, rented spaces, and retreat centers. These ranged from carefully held spaces honoring traditional protocols to reckless operations prioritizing money over safety. The internet accelerated ayahuasca's spread. Online forums, trip reports, and guides to preparation and sourcing made information accessible to anyone interested. Websites offered ayahuasca vine and chacruna for sale, shipped internationally, exploiting legal loopholes. While possessing DMT is illegal, possessing the plants is often not, a distinction that allows commerce in the raw materials. This created a DIY ayahuasca scene where individuals brewed their own medicine, often without proper knowledge or support structures. Some had profound, positive experiences. Others had terrifying, destabilizing experiences with no one to help them integrate. A few suffered serious psychological harm, or, in combination with contraindicated medications, physical harm. The commercialization of ayahuasca reached new heights with luxury retreat centers offering amenities alongside ceremony. For thousands of dollars, clients receive accommodations in jungle lodges with private rooms, gourmet meals, spa services, yoga classes, and multiple ayahuasca ceremonies. These retreats market transformation and healing to wealthy Westerners seeking personal growth or spiritual experiences. Critics argue this commodification strips ayahuasca of its sacred context, turning profound medicine into a consumer product. The economic disparity is stark. Indigenous practitioners living in poverty while retreat centers charge prices those practitioners will never earn in a lifetime. The extraction of traditional knowledge for profit, without adequate compensation to knowledge holders, is a form of biopiracy. Defenders of retreat centers argue they provide safe, structured contexts for people who would otherwise have no access to ayahuasca, or who would encounter it in unsafe, underground settings. They emphasize their respect for tradition, partnerships with indigenous communities, and contributions to rainforest conservation. The truth likely lies somewhere between these positions, with enormous variation in ethics and quality across the industry. Environmental concerns accompany ayahuasca's commercialization. The plants, particularly Banisteriopsis caapi, which takes years to mature, face overharvesting pressure. Some regions have implemented regulations or cultivation programs to ensure sustainability, but enforcement is inconsistent. The irony is bitter. A medicine used to connect people with nature is contributing to environmental degradation through its own popularity. Social media has created an aestheticized version of ayahuasca, Instagram posts of beautiful ceremony spaces, glowing testimonials, before and after narratives of transformation. This presentation often omits the difficulty, the purging, the psychological confrontation that ayahuasca demands. It markets ayahuasca as a quick fix for Western malaise, undermining the serious, challenging work the medicine requires. The routes ayahuasca traveled from the Amazon to global consumption are not the routes of drug trafficking, but of cultural transmission, spiritual seeking, and capitalist expansion. There is no violence in these networks, but there is exploitation, appropriation, and the corruption that accompanies any sacred thing when it becomes a commodity. As ayahuasca arrives in the hands of Western consumers, far from its origins, the question becomes, what remains of its power and integrity, and what is lost in translation? Ayahuasca reaches Western consumers primarily through retreat centers in Peru, Brazil, Costa Rica, and increasingly other countries with less restrictive drug laws. These centers range from rustic jungle lodges to resort-like facilities with modern amenities. A typical retreat lasts a week to 10 days, includes 3 to 4 ayahuasca ceremonies interspersed with integration activities like yoga, meditation, art therapy, and nature walks. The participants are diverse, but show clear demographic patterns. Most are white, middle to upper middle class, educated, ranging from mid-20s to mid-60s. Many work in tech, creative fields, or healing professions. They come seeking healing from trauma, depression, or addiction, seeking spiritual experiences after feeling disconnected from traditional religion, or seeking personal growth and self-understanding. The cost is substantial, typically $2,000 to $5,000 for a week-long retreat, not including international travel. This price point restricts access to those with financial resources, creating an economic filter that shapes who encounters ayahuasca. The medicine's reputation as a privilege of the wealthy contrasts sharply with its origins, serving some of the world's poorest communities. Urban ayahuasca ceremonies, held in cities far from the Amazon, have become increasingly common. A facilitator, who may have trained with indigenous shamans or who may have limited experience, hosts ceremonies in private homes, rented spaces, or dedicated centers. Participants gather in the evening, creating a ceremonial space with candles, incense, and sometimes sacred objects. The facilitator serves the medicine, leads songs or plays recorded icaros, and attempts to hold space for whatever emerges. These urban ceremonies lack the cultural embedding of traditional practice. There is no lifelong relationship with a shaman, no community context, no integration into daily spiritual life. The ceremony is an event, something that happens and then is over, disconnected from the broader fabric of existence. This fragmentation changes the experience's meaning and impact. The demographics of urban ceremony participants mirror retreat centers, predominantly white, educated, middle class. Some participants are serious practitioners attending regularly as part of ongoing healing and spiritual work. Others are experimenters, curious about psychedelics, treating ayahuasca as an adventure or bucket list item. This mixing of intentions in a single ceremony creates tensions and can compromise the container's integrity. Cultural appropriation concerns surround Western ayahuasca use. Indigenous peoples developed this medicine over thousands of years, refined the practices, paid the cultural costs of preservation through suppression and marginalization. Now Westerners, often with superficial engagement with indigenous culture, consume the medicine while indigenous communities continue facing poverty, discrimination, and land loss. Some retreat centers and facilitators attempt to address this through partnerships with indigenous communities, financial contributions, or cultural education. Others operate with minimal reference to ayahuasca's origins, presenting the medicine as simply a tool for consciousness exploration, stripping it of cultural context entirely. The question of who has the right to use ayahuasca is contested. Indigenous advocates argue that ayahuasca is inseparable from its cultural context, and that its use outside that context is appropriation and theft. Others, including some indigenous practitioners, argue that the medicine is a gift meant to be shared, that the plants themselves want to spread and heal, and that restricting access contradicts ayahuasca's purpose. Safety concerns arise in both retreat and urban contexts. Ayahuasca is generally physically safe for healthy individuals, but it carries risks. The MAO inhibitors in the Brew interact dangerously with certain medications, particularly antidepressants, and certain foods containing tyramine. Participants must follow dietary restrictions before and after ceremonies to avoid potentially fatal reactions. Psychological risks are more common. Ayahuasca can trigger latent psychosis in vulnerable individuals, cause prolonged anxiety or depression, or bring up traumatic material without adequate support for processing it. Facilitators vary widely in their ability to handle psychological emergencies. Some have training in psychology or crisis intervention. Others have minimal preparation for dealing with participants in acute distress. Sexual abuse has occurred in ayahuasca contexts, both in the Amazon and in Western settings. The power differential between facilitator and participant, the vulnerability induced by the medicine, and the lack of regulation create conditions where predatory individuals can exploit participants. High-profile cases have exposed abuses, but the decentralized, often underground nature of ayahuasca ceremony makes accountability difficult. Despite these concerns, many participants report profoundly positive experiences. They describe ayahuasca as the most meaningful experience of their lives, providing insights that years of therapy could not access, healing traumas they had carried for decades, or revealing a sense of interconnection and purpose that transformed their relationship to existence. The integration challenge is substantial. The insights and resolutions experienced during ceremony must be translated into changed behavior and perspective in daily life. Without integration support, the powerful experiences fade, and participants return to old patterns. Some retreat centers offer integration coaching, online support groups, or follow-up sessions. Many do not, leaving participants to navigate the aftermath alone. The social media presentation of ayahuasca creates unrealistic expectations. Posts showing beautiful ceremony spaces, glowing testimonials, and simplified transformation narratives omit the difficulty, confusion, and sometimes lack of clear resolution that accompany many experiences. The reality is messier, less aesthetic, more challenging than the Instagram version suggests. Ayahuasca in consumer contexts exists in tension between healing and commodification, tradition and innovation, accessibility and appropriation, safety and freedom, the sacred and the commercial. As the medicine reaches millions who would never have encountered it within its traditional contexts, these tensions play out in every ceremony, every retreat, every online discussion. What happens inside the individual consuming ayahuasca, the internal journey through visions, purging, and transformation, is where the medicine's true nature reveals itself, regardless of the external context. The ayahuasca experience begins with drinking the brew, usually a small cup containing 30 to 100 milliliters of thick, bitter liquid. The taste is immediately unpleasant, and the body's initial response is often rejection, nausea rising almost instantly. Participants are encouraged to keep the medicine down, to breathe through the discomfort, to surrender to what is coming. Within 30 to 45 minutes, the DMT begins reaching the brain in sufficient concentrations to produce noticeable effects. The MAO inhibitors from the vine have disabled the enzymes that would normally destroy DMT, allowing it to cross from the digestive system into the bloodstream, through the blood-brain barrier, and into neural tissue where it can bind to serotonin receptors, the 5-HT2A receptor, which DMT activates with high affinity, is distributed throughout the brain but is particularly concentrated in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for executive function, self-awareness, and the sense of being a distinct self. When DMT floods these receptors, normal patterns of brain activity are dramatically disrupted. Research using brain imaging has shown that psychedelics, including ayahuasca, decrease activity in the default mode network, a collection of brain regions active during rest and self-referential thought. This network maintains the ego, the sense of being a separate self with a continuous identity across time. When the default mode network's activity decreases, the boundaries of self become fluid, permeable, or dissolve entirely. This ego dissolution is one of ayahuasca's most profound and challenging effects. The familiar sense of I begins to fragment or disappear. Participants report feeling merged with their surroundings, experiencing themselves as consciousness without identity, or temporarily losing all sense of individual existence. For some, this is terrifying, a kind of death. For others, it is liberating, revealing the constructed nature of the ego and offering a glimpse of a more expansive sense of being. The visionary component begins as the DMT reaches peak concentrations. With eyes closed, intricate geometric patterns appear, often described as Amazonian or organic in character, featuring spirals, lattices, and morphing fractal designs. Colors are impossibly vivid, beyond any palette found in normal perception. These patterns often transition into more representational imagery. Jungles dense with foliage, serpents with jeweled scales, jaguars moving through darkness, spirit beings with non-human features. Many participants encounter entities during ayahuasca experiences. These beings may appear as humanoid, animal, geometric, or entirely abstract. They communicate through a kind of direct transmission of meaning that bypasses language. Participants describe receiving teachings, understandings about their lives, or insights into the nature of reality that feel as though they are being shown rather than thought. The interpretation of these entities varies. Some participants believe they are encountering genuinely autonomous beings existing in other dimensions or spiritual realms. Others understand them as projections of the unconscious mind, personifications of psychological processes or archetypes. From a neuroscientific perspective, they are likely constructs generated by a brain operating in a highly unusual state, but this explanation does not diminish their subjective reality or potential meaning. The emotional content of ayahuasca experiences is often intense. Suppressed traumas surface with visceral force, demanding to be witnessed and processed. Participants may relive painful memories with new perspective, understanding, or compassion. They may confront their deepest fears, their capacity for harm, or their most shameful moments. This confrontation is not intellectual but felt, experienced in the body and psyche with overwhelming intensity. But ayahuasca also reveals love, connection, and beauty with equal intensity. Participants report experiencing unconditional love, often described as the fundamental nature of reality, underlying all suffering and confusion. They feel profound gratitude for existence, for their lives despite all pain. They experience interconnection with all living things, a felt sense of being part of a larger whole. The purging continues throughout. Waves of nausea arrive unpredictably, sometimes during profound visions, sometimes during moments of apparent calm. Vomiting is common, often violent and prolonged. Participants may also experience diarrhea, sweating, shaking, or crying. From the indigenous perspective, this is the medicine working, extracting illness and imbalance. From a Western perspective, it is the body's response to substances it recognizes as toxic, plus the emotional release triggered by the psychological content of the experience. The physical sensations are not limited to purging. Many participants report feeling energy moving through their bodies, blockages releasing, or a kind of internal rearrangement occurring. Some experience what feels like surgery performed by invisible hands, targeting areas of illness or trauma. These sensations are vivid and convincing, though they have no clear physical correlate. The icaros, the songs sung by the shaman or played during ceremony, are perceived as having tangible effects on the experience. Participants describe the songs as visible, moving through space as colored light or geometric patterns. They report that specific songs shift the character of their visions, provide comfort during difficult moments, or guide the experience in particular directions. Whether this reflects the song's actual influence or the participants' expectations and suggestibility is unclear. But the subjective reality is consistent across reports. Time becomes profoundly distorted. Minutes can feel like hours or lifetimes. Entire narratives play out in what objectively might be seconds. Some participants lose all sense of linear time, experiencing past, present, and future simultaneously, or entering states where time seems meaningless. The peak of the experience, occurring 1 to 2 hours after ingestion, is where the most intense visions and insights occur. This is when ego dissolution is most complete, when the visions are most vivid, when the emotional intensity reaches its height. Participants are often completely absorbed in the internal experience, unaware of their physical surroundings, lying or sitting motionless while navigating vast internal landscapes. As DMT is metabolized and eliminated, effects gradually diminish. The visions become less intense, the sense of self begins reconstituting, and awareness of the physical body and external environment returns. This emergence phase can be tender and vulnerable. Participants often feel raw, opened, profoundly altered, yet uncertain how to integrate what they experienced. The neuroplasticity triggered by ayahuasca may underlie its therapeutic potential. Research suggests that psychedelics promote the growth of new neural connections, particularly in brain regions involved in mood regulation and cognitive flexibility. This increased plasticity creates windows of opportunity for changing entrenched patterns of thought and behavior, potentially explaining why single ayahuasca experiences can produce lasting shifts in perspective or symptom relief in conditions like depression or PTSD. The pharmacology explains how ayahuasca works, but it cannot fully explain what is experienced. Whether the visions are merely hallucinations produced by a disordered brain, or genuine perceptions of other dimensions of reality. Whether the entities are autonomous beings or psychological projections. Whether the healing is placebo or pharmacological. All of these questions remain open. What is certain is that ayahuasca produces experiences that feel profoundly real and meaningful to those who undergo them. And these experiences can have lasting impacts on behavior, perspective, and well-being. The question of whether those impacts are positive or negative, healing or harmful, depends on many factors including dose, setting, individual psychology, and the quality of integration support available after the experience. Ayahuasca's long-term effects are more benign than substances like heroin, methamphetamine, or even alcohol. but they are not without complexity and risk. The physical safety profile is generally good. Ayahuasca is not toxic to organs, does not cause physical dependence, and carries minimal risk of fatal overdose when used alone by healthy individuals. The primary physical risks come from interactions with other substances. The MAO inhibitors in ayahuasca interact dangerously with many medications, particularly selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, a common class of antidepressants. Combining these can cause serotonin syndrome, a potentially fatal condition involving hyperthermia, rapid heart rate, seizures, and altered mental status. Participants must discontinue SSRIs weeks before ayahuasca use, which itself carries risks for those dependent on these medications for mental health stability. Certain foods containing tyramine, normally metabolized by MAO enzymes, become dangerous when consumed with ayahuasca. These include aged cheeses, cured meats, fermented foods, and some alcoholic beverages. Traditional dietas restrict these foods for days or weeks before and after ceremony, both for safety and to prepare the body and spirit for the medicine. Pre-existing mental health conditions require careful consideration. Ayahuasca can trigger psychosis in individuals with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. It can cause prolonged anxiety or depression in vulnerable individuals. Those with a history of severe trauma may experience re-traumatization without adequate therapeutic support. Responsible facilitators screen participants for these risk factors, but screening is inconsistent, and some people conceal their histories out of fear of being turned away. Despite these risks, research on ayahuasca's mental health effects has shown promising results. Studies of regular ayahuasca users in Brazil, particularly members of Santo Daime and UDV churches, have found lower rates of depression, anxiety, and substance use disorders compared to control populations. Brain imaging studies show structural and functional changes in regions associated with mood regulation and cognitive control. Clinical trials investigating ayahuasca for treatment-resistant depression have shown significant symptom reduction lasting weeks after single or multiple sessions. Participants report feeling reconnected to life, gaining new perspectives on their problems, and experiencing relief from the rumination and hopelessness characteristic of depression. The effects appear comparable to or exceeding those of conventional antidepressants, but with faster onset and potentially longer duration. Research on ayahuasca for addiction treatment is preliminary, but encouraging. Some studies suggest ayahuasca helps people reduce or quit alcohol, cocaine, and opioid use. The mechanism may involve the profound perspective shifts and emotional processing that ayahuasca facilitates, allowing people to confront the underlying pain driving their addictive behaviors. Additionally, the unpleasant physical effects of ayahuasca make it unsuitable for recreational use, eliminating the risk of substituting one addiction for another. PTSD treatment with ayahuasca has shown promise in observational studies and anecdotal reports, though rigorous clinical trials are limited. Participants describe processing traumatic memories with less reactivity, integrating fragmented trauma narratives into coherent understanding, and experiencing reduced hypervigilance and intrusive symptoms. The controlled setting and therapeutic support during and after ceremonies appear crucial for positive outcomes. However, not all experiences are healing. Some participants have prolonged difficult experiences, extended periods of anxiety, dissociation, or depression following ayahuasca use. This is particularly likely when ceremonies are poorly facilitated, when participants are psychologically unstable, or when integration support is absent. The term spiritual emergency describes situations where psychedelic experiences trigger psychological crises that require professional intervention. The absence of addiction potential distinguishes ayahuasca from substances like opioids or stimulants. Regular users do not develop physical dependence or compulsive use patterns. The unpleasant physical effects and the psychological intensity make frequent use unappealing for most people. Traditional practitioners may work with ayahuasca regularly, but their use is ceremonial and intentional, not driven by craving or tolerance. Some individuals do develop problematic patterns of use, not addiction in the classical sense, but a kind of spiritual bypassing where they use ayahuasca to avoid dealing with practical life problems. They attend ceremony after ceremony, seeking ever deeper insights, while neglecting relationships, employment, and responsibilities. This pattern reflects psychological issues rather than pharmacological dependence, but can be equally destructive. The integration challenge cannot be overstated. Ayahuasca experiences often provide profound insights and resolutions during ceremony, but translating these into lasting change requires work. Without integration, the insights fade and old patterns reassert. Integration may involve therapy, journaling, lifestyle changes, shifting relationships, or altering career paths. It requires time, support, and commitment. Some people experience lasting positive changes after single ayahuasca experiences. They quit addictions, leave abusive relationships, change careers, reconcile with estranged family, or develop spiritual practices that sustain them. Others have powerful experiences that ultimately change nothing, the insights lost as daily life reasserts its demands. The question of whether ayahuasca-induced changes are genuine or placebo is complex. Research shows measurable neurobiological changes and clinical improvements that suggest effects beyond expectation. But expectation, setting, cultural context, and personal meaning all influence outcomes in ways difficult to separate from pharmacology. Long-term regular use, particularly in religious contexts like Santo Daime or UDV, appears to be sustainable and potentially beneficial. Studies of long-term users show cognitive function preserved or enhanced, emotional well-being better than general populations, and strong social support networks. These positive outcomes likely reflect not just ayahuasca use, but the broader context of community, ritual, and purpose within which use occurs. Environmental concerns extend beyond harvesting pressures. Ayahuasca tourism brings Western tourists to fragile rainforest ecosystems, creating waste, disrupting wildlife, and introducing economic dynamics that can destabilize indigenous communities. Some retreat centers operate with minimal environmental consideration, while others implement sustainability practices and contribute to conservation efforts. The long-term impact of ayahuasca on individuals and communities is still unfolding. As use expands globally, as research deepens understanding of mechanisms and outcomes, and as cultural conversations about psychedelics continue evolving, ayahuasca's role in modern society remains contested and dynamic. The final chapter situates ayahuasca within broader historical, cultural, and political contexts, examining what this ancient medicine reveals about contemporary society and the future of healing. Ayahuasca's journey from the Amazon to global phenomenon reveals fundamental tensions in how modern societies relate to indigenous knowledge, spirituality, nature, and healing. Unlike drugs that emerged from laboratories or agricultural commodification, ayahuasca comes from cultures that Western civilization has systematically marginalized and attempted to destroy. Its popularity now, among the descendants of colonizers, raises profound ethical questions. The biopiracy concern is central. Indigenous peoples developed ayahuasca practices over thousands of years, preserving this knowledge through colonization, missionization, and marginalization. Now, pharmaceutical companies and researchers seek to patent ayahuasca preparations or isolate compounds for commercialization. In 1986, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office granted a patent on a strain of Banisteriopsis caapi to an American entrepreneur. Indigenous organizations protested, arguing that patenting a plant central to their spiritual practice was theft. The patent was eventually rejected, then reinstated, then rejected again. But the case illustrated the vulnerability of indigenous knowledge to appropriation. The legal framework surrounding ayahuasca reflects colonialism's legacy. Western legal systems categorize DMT as dangerous and prohibited, criminalizing indigenous practices that predate these nations by millennia. Religious freedom exemptions, like those granted to Santo Daime and UDV in some countries, create a two-tier system where formalized Western-compatible religions can use ayahuasca legally while indigenous practitioners in their own territories face prohibition. This legal reality is deeply hypocritical. The same governments that banned indigenous plant use now debate whether to allow their citizens access to these medicines for mental health treatment. The framing shifts from criminalizing drugs to legitimizing medicines or therapies, but only when controlled by Western medical and legal systems. Indigenous knowledge is simultaneously denied validity and exploited for profit. The psychedelic renaissance of the 2010s, driven by research at institutions like Johns Hopkins and Imperial College London, has increased interest in ayahuasca and other plant medicines. This research is valuable, providing scientific validation for what indigenous peoples have known for thousands of years. But the dynamic mirrors historical patterns. Western institutions claiming authority over knowledge they did not create, with indigenous peoples credited, if at all, as sources of raw material, rather than sophisticated knowledge systems. Some researchers and organizations actively work to center indigenous voices, partner equitably, and ensure benefits flow to source communities. The challenge is that academic and medical systems are designed to extract, codify, and own knowledge, not to honor oral traditions or communal ownership. The very act of translating ayahuasca into Western frameworks, clinical trials, peer-reviewed publications, FDA approval pathways, transforms it into something alien to its origins. The environmental dimension adds urgency. The Amazon rainforest, source of ayahuasca and thousands of medicinal plants, is being destroyed at catastrophic rates. Deforestation driven by agriculture, logging, mining, and ranching eliminates plant species before they can be studied and destroys the ecosystems indigenous peoples depend on. Ayahuasca tourism, ironically, both threatens and protects. It creates economic incentives for forest conservation while increasing harvesting pressure and bringing destabilizing outside influence. Some argue that ayahuasca's global spread will save the rainforest by giving Westerners direct experience of nature's intelligence and interconnection, inspiring them to protect what they would otherwise ignore. Others argue that commodifying ayahuasca accelerates the very destruction it supposedly prevents, making it one more resource to extract before the forest disappears. The spiritual dimension is perhaps most contested. For indigenous peoples, ayahuasca is inseparable from a cosmology where plants, animals, and humans are persons engaged in reciprocal relationships. Western seekers often adopt surface elements of this worldview, speaking of plant spirits, honoring the medicine, while maintaining materialist assumptions about consciousness and reality. This selective appropriation troubles indigenous practitioners who see their entire worldview reduced to aesthetic elements. bolted onto fundamentally unchanged Western perspectives. Yet some indigenous practitioners welcome ayahuasca's spread. They view the medicine as a gift from the plants themselves, meant to heal not just individuals, but civilizations. From this perspective, Western culture's destructive relationship with nature and the spiritual dimensions of existence requires healing that ayahuasca can provide. Restricting access would deny the medicine's purpose. This tension between protection and sharing has no easy resolution. The historical context of colonization, genocide, and ongoing marginalization makes any Western use of indigenous practices fraught. But completely restricting access seems equally problematic, denying people potentially life-saving medicine and perpetuating the separation between Western and indigenous worldviews that underlies many contemporary crises. The therapeutic applications of ayahuasca are being integrated into Western healthcare systems, though slowly and with resistance. MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and similar organizations conduct research with the goal of making psychedelic-assisted therapy, including ayahuasca, available through legal medical channels. If successful, this would provide regulated access but also further medicalize and commodify what has been a sacred practice. The question of training is critical. Who is qualified to facilitate ayahuasca experiences? Indigenous shamans undergo years or decades of apprenticeship, dietas, and direct relationship building with plant spirits. Western therapists receive academic training in psychology, but often have limited personal psychedelic experience. Some hybrid models combine both approaches, but tensions persist about what constitutes legitimate preparation. The community dimension of traditional ayahuasca use is largely absent in Western contexts. In indigenous communities, ceremony is embedded in ongoing relationships, shared cosmology, and collective life. Participants know the shaman personally, trust them deeply, and share cultural understanding about what the experience means. Western ayahuasca use is typically transactional. Participants pay for a service, attend ceremonies with strangers, and return to lives disconnected from the ceremonial context. This fragmentation may limit ayahuasca's effectiveness. The medicine works not in isolation but within relationships, meaning-making frameworks, and practices of ongoing spiritual engagement. Without these elements, ayahuasca becomes another consumer experience, powerful, but ultimately disconnected from the web of relationships that give it full meaning and power. The future of ayahuasca is uncertain. Legal status varies widely and continues evolving. Scientific research expands understanding while potentially paving the way for pharmaceutical exploitation. Tourism grows, bringing economic opportunities and cultural disruption. Climate change and deforestation threaten the plants themselves, and the tension between honoring indigenous origins and meeting global demand for healing remains unresolved. What is clear is that ayahuasca has something Western culture desperately needs. The epidemic levels of depression, anxiety, addiction, and existential emptiness in wealthy nations suggest profound spiritual and social illness. Pharmaceutical interventions help some people but leave many untouched. Ayahuasca offers an alternative, though one that demands more of participants than swallowing a daily pill: confrontation with self, surrender to the unknown, and integration of insights into changed life. The indigenous peoples who preserved ayahuasca through centuries of persecution did not do so for Western benefit. They preserved it because it is central to their own spiritual and healing practices. That Westerners now find value in ayahuasca is secondary to its importance within the cultures that created it. Any ethical engagement with ayahuasca must begin with this recognition and with genuine effort to support indigenous rights, rainforest conservation, and decolonization of relationships between Western and indigenous peoples. The molecule itself, DMT, combined with harmala alkaloids, functions identically, whether prepared by a Shipibo shaman after months of dieta or by a Brooklyn facilitator following a recipe from the internet. But the meaning, the safety, the integration, and the spiritual authenticity differ profoundly. Ayahuasca's power is not reducible to its chemistry, any more than love is reducible to oxytocin or art to patterns of light on canvas. The journey of ayahuasca from jungle vine to global phenomenon is still unfolding. It is a story of colonization and resistance, of ancient wisdom meeting modern crisis, of capitalism commodifying the sacred, of desperate seekers and exploitative opportunists, of genuine healing and spiritual bypassing. It contains all of humanity's best and worst impulses, our capacity for reverence, and our tendency toward exploitation. What ayahuasca ultimately becomes in global culture will depend on choices being made now. Whether ayahuasca remains tethered to its roots or becomes another extracted resource, whether it heals or merely entertains, whether it bridges cultures or deepens divisions, all of this depends on the intentions, actions, and ethics of those who work with it. The vine of the soul continues growing in the Amazon, indifferent to human conflicts about its use and meaning. The DMT in chacruna leaves remains molecularly unchanged, whether the plants are wild or cultivated, sacred or commercial. The experience of drinking ayahuasca continues producing visions, purging, and transformation. The medicine does what the medicine does. How humans respond, what they make of the experience, whether they honor its origins, whether they integrate its lessons, whether they use it to heal or simply to escape, all of this is still being written. The story of ayahuasca is not finished. It is a story still in motion, still transforming, still teaching, still revealing the distance between what humans claim to value and how they actually behave when confronted with the sacred.